everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. This is your host, Rebecca Tapia. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to put a plug in quickly. If you could please share this podcast, leave me a review. I think the last review I had was from August. So I was looking at them the other day. When I get a new review, it's so inspiring, keeps everything interesting, and I love getting that feedback. So if you could please take some time, leave me a review on whichever platform you listen. So anyway, I am thinking about kind of brain dumping some topics that have been in my head for a while. And I have a couple of different patients that are kind of trending towards this topic. And I just thought it was interesting to maybe sit down with you and step through it. And I wanted to talk about the concept of earned rest. And yes, a lot of these things I just kind of make up and fill in behind the concept. So I am determining that this means sort of this idea or concept that you've worked hard your whole life, you've taken care of other people your whole life, and you get to some point where you need care. And it's like the grand bargain, the grand expectation, checking the ledger and looking at all the things that you've supported or people that you've supported throughout your life. And now that it comes time for you to need support, kind of analyzing what that is or how that comes about. I'm thinking of one patient in particular who is a retired nurse that worked as a nurse for over 30 years, experienced some health setbacks. One thing has led to another. She's in her late 60s, ends up in a long-term care type setting. She's not able to walk around that easily, needs assistance getting out of bed, taking a shower, had multiple falls at home. And so, but when I'm talking to her, she gets kind of teary-eyed when we talk about just the future and what's, been going on. And she repeatedly goes back to this mantra of, but I've worked so hard my entire life for it to come to this. And when I ask her, what do you mean? She's like, I've just worked so hard. I've taken care of so many other people and I'm here. And what I really want is for my son to take care of me. And I said, well, what's going on with that? And she said, well, he was taking care of me and I, fell several times and had lots of injuries and ended up in the hospital repeatedly. And now he's telling me I can't come home. And when I get kind of curious and I try to learn a little bit more about what's going on there, turns out that her son has 2 children with special needs that take a lot of his time and resources. And he has told her, frankly, I just can't afford to also take care of you, because she does require that hands-on care to get in and out of bed, to dress and so forth. And so she gets tearful, she starts crying, and I, try to get some encouragement and lay out a plan and not overpromise. And then, the next time I see her, we kind of go down this route again. And so she said repeatedly to me, why did I work this hard to end up like this? And what I really think at the end of the day, that what she seems to be struggling with is some grief, right? And I feel like there is this unspoken rule with the universe that many of us follow, including myself, that you kind of put your coins in, right? You try to be a good person, you try to make good choices, or you try to take care of other people and be the best that you can be. And for her, she chose a profession where she's literally taking care of other people, cleaning them, changing them, supporting them, giving them medications, helping them get to and from the bathroom. And so she's in a position now where, of course, in the setting that she's in, she has that kind of support. But what she wants is to have that support and be at home, which, as we've talked about, is exceedingly expensive, and most normal people can't afford that. And she makes too much money to qualify for, aid or caregiver support, but not enough money to pay for it independently. And she kind of falls in this terrible kind of donut, if you will, of too much money for some services, but not enough money for other services. And I know that when I've talked to her about her family situation, that she understands and appreciates that her son is trying his best to take care of her grandchildren and can't necessarily take care of her. And I don't think that she so much argues with that. And I'm not even sure if she's arguing with her son. I think she's arguing with the universe, which is, how could it be that I've gotten this far and I got to the end of my career, and in short order after that, she has found herself needing a lot of extra care. And so I see her kind of moving that towards just this kind of shaking the fist in the air at just how things have turned out for her health-wise. not so much that, my son should be doing this or that. I think from a pragmatic standpoint, she just understands that they did try to support her at home and she wasn't safe. She had a series of falls. And so she's been in and out of a couple of different rehab units and is now coming to terms with the idea that she will be here probably long term. I mean, the third or fourth, maybe fifth rehab stint that you have, because every time you go home, it fails. At some point, kind of the universe is pointing towards that this is going to be maybe a long-term care situation, unless something would happen with a different family member. Sometimes they come out of the woodwork and we'll be able to provide some support, but that's a problem. And I've had a lot of patients that, and I don't, how do I say this? Like, I don't blame them. And I think subconsciously you do the best you can when you're healthy and you hope that you receive in return when you also need help. And the problem is I wish I could go to everybody thinking that way and say, I wish it just doesn't always turn out that way, right? There are certain, functional conditions or disease progressions that mean that whatever resources exist from your family, be they, very much admiring you, loving you, wanting to do the best for you, in many cases, it can't be enough. Like, it can't be enough to keep that person safe. It can't be enough. Like, there just isn't enough there. And that there could be a progression to where, you mix that in with whatever the financial resources are, that you do end up in a long-term care setting. And for a lot of patients, that is the absolute best, safest, situation for them to continue any relationship with their family, right? Who wants to be in and out of the hospital constantly because you're constantly falling at home, at least in a nursing facility where you have support to go to and from the bathroom and take a shower. People can come visit. People can be part of your life. They can participate. And you can even maybe preserve some of that traditional relationship as a grandmother and not necessarily kind of caretaker and patient, which can set up very quickly when you have an adult child taking care of an aging parent. So there is some benefit to it long term, but I've always gone back to just kind of think about, this concept of earned rest. Like, how is it earned? And you think, well, usually it's because you're working really hard or you're doing really difficult things or you're getting to a point in your life where you can kind of sit down. And that's what's kind of happened with this patient. I don't think there was very much time between her retirement as a nurse and this compilation of health issues that just sort of led to her needing care. Like, she didn't get to enjoy her period of earned rest, right? And there's this transition that you go from being a giver and then maybe a transition to where you're kind of neutral and then a receiver of care. And that transition can happen over a long period of time. And I've seen that transition happen in hours, right? Somebody completely healthy have a random health event, like usually a neurological event like a stroke, or maybe it could be a cardiac event like a heart attack, and suddenly go from being the giver to the receiver. And at that point, you feel kind of powerless. You feel like things are not within your control. Obviously, this thing might have happened out of nowhere, like this health event. And so you have to transition your identity very quickly from a giver to a receiver. And of course, I'm kind of overgeneralizing here, right? But this idea is even that identity shift, there can be some grief in that. And anytime something happens outside of your control, for a lot of people, that reaction is going to be to try to control or to try to fix or to try to mitigate, what just happened. And you could feel completely out of control when these health issues pile up. And so going back to, kind of the idea of the ledger, right? Like, I've kind of put this in and then the universe should take care of me on the other end. And all I can say is, from what I've seen living in this part of the care spectrum for a long time, is, yeah, like, there are a lot of safety nets here in the United States that aren't available in other countries. And, there will be care available, but you're not going to have as much control over it as you might think. And you're not going to have as much choice as you might think. And that care may not look as good as you might think it looks, right? So, I mean, half of what I do when I'm talking to patients is field complaints about the dining hall and the food being not so great. And, so it's not perfect. And I am here to warn you that it's not perfect. Some are very, very imperfect and some are close to perfect. But the idea is that care that's available on the other end that we've kind of hopefully don't need, but may end up needing, is kind of what it is. And if you don't like the care in one place, and you try out a different place, and you might be, switching one problem out for another, but this is sounding kind of negative. And I don't mean this. I just mean like what I see as active grief of like, is this it? I worked my whole life to end up needing help to go to the bathroom. And like a part of me is like, yeah, I mean, sometimes that's what happens. And I say that with as much empathy and as much hope as I could possibly engender. And if your aging parent is going through this, it's just hard. And you're not just looking at a decrement in function, like somebody suddenly can't walk or whatever. What we have to understand is that not only do you have this identity shift happening, right? So there's the grief about kind of the uncontrolled transition between the giver and the receiver. And then I would offer to you that sometimes what's also there is a grief about an imagined future of how someone thought it was going to go, how much care they were being able to get. Oh, well, my son will be able to take care of me, or, oh, I'll stay healthy until I'm 97 years old, or, and understand me. I mean, all of us like to, I'm sure, set up what the future might look like. Your brain does that automatically, kind of subconsciously, and has this idea. And maybe with her working in the healthcare field, she's like, oh, this is kind of rare. These things don't normally happen. Maybe I'm going to live to be this long and not need this much help. But we have to understand that a lot of times what you're seeing is that grief about the lost future that never came true. Maybe for her, it was a lost retirement that never came to fruition. And sometimes, grief presents in weird ways. Sometimes grief presents as sadness. Sometimes it presents as irritability. Sometimes it presents as overly controlling behavior. So I can't control what's happening with my health or, this care setting that I'm in, but I sure can control, these couple of little things in other people's lives or something. So maybe it kind of comes out that way. And it kind of compounds, right? So if there's a mood disorder on top of that, like depression or anxiety, then those can also be kicked off. And so I do think especially if you see somebody changing into a new care setting, such as an assisted living or a long-term care type setting, on top of just the physical change of being in a new environment, we have to think about the idea of what did earned rest look like to them. And maybe in some cases, this assisted living is that. They're like, look, I'm getting help when I need it. I'm totally happy with it. And what's weird, and so, such a teacher for me when I go through these different settings is they have two patients in the exact same setting, and some can be like, oh my God, is this it? I can't believe I'm here. And I go to the next patient, and they're like, I'm so thankful that these facilities and this kind of staff and, and this kind of support exists for somebody like me. I just, I can't thank everybody enough. This is amazing. And so, part of it is, again, that kind of expectation management and what somebody thought might happen and what ended up happening. And the gap between those two things being far more important to understand than the actual circumstances. Because a lot of that grief and a lot of that sadness lives in the gap between what they projected or thought may happen and then what actually ended up happening. When I talk specifically about the expectations of a child, I can tell you that I've seen that there's a lot of just general variability between two people in the same family. There's cultural variability, some of which we've discussed on the podcast previously. But even that quote unquote ledger, right, checking of, I cared for you as a child. Now I am an aging parent and I need extra help. Now it's your turn to take care of me. And for some people, that's a given. Like there are some families where that is just the absolute given. And to be honest, there are some families that I've talked to and been, involved with clinically that it's the opposite. It's like, no, you go live your life. I'm here to take care of myself. I'll make my own care decisions. I appreciate your support when I might need it intermittently, but I'm seeing my life out. And so that earned rest could be, I have earned that and I'm going to see myself through the end of my life. Or, hey, I've gotten to this point. You kind of look back and look at the adult children and say, now it's your turn to help with me as well. So they might, it could be variable. I'm sure it's possible that there are some assumptions there that you don't know about yet and they haven't been, publicly proclaimed. And a lot of times in a hospital setting, because again, I'm part of the time when something terrible happens and somebody's struggling with a new diagnosis or a new functional problem, and I'm there live as the previous quiet assumptions are now being shared with the family about what the expectations are of how that family will show up and take care of them. Some practical tips of like understanding what earned rest might mean to somebody is trying to put some name or some color around what those concepts are. So asking somebody, what does being cared for mean? Does that mean time together? Does that mean help with meals? Does that mean help with, rides or transportation? Does that mean help with your finances? Does it mean help with, housekeeping, something like that? So when we kind of think of an earned rest period post retirement or post, some new health condition, having those kind of guided conversations around different topics, like just to have some idea, can be really helpful, especially ahead of time. It can be really challenging. This is not necessarily something you'd want to like kind of learn on the fly, if you will. Like, oh, I didn't realize you expected me to help with this. I didn't realize you expected me to take you to all of your appointments and take time off of work. And so there's a lot of different boundaries that may be in place or challenged in this setting. But I would encourage you ahead of time if possible. And then as you go into some sort of big functional change, just understanding, hey, what does being cared for look like? And in some cases, it may be, I just want you to be available. I just want you to check in on me. Another angle on looking at earned rest is also a change in functional status and physical activity. I say this with relation to the post-retirement period. And, that's probably a whole other podcast now that I think about it. But the post-retirement period is a very interesting health issue, experience, risk, I would say. When somebody is still working, there is a certain time they need to be somewhere, usually a certain place they need to be, usually some sort of social aspect to it. They're seeing people even if they don't like them, right? And then there's some sort of gratification with the completed work or ongoing challenges or constantly finding, new ways to expand and to learn. And for a lot of people that work towards retirement, they kind of see that as a cutoff. And I will tell you, I learned there is a lot of idolizing what retirement may look like and what, kind of this, I'm really overwhelmed right now. And that looks like a period of rest. And for some people, they do retirement, great, 5 stars. But for a lot of people, what they don't realize is they're kind of stepping off of a cliff. And once that retirement comes, they lose some things. They gain back their time. Maybe they gain back some flexibility. But for a lot of people, they lose that structure to the day. And they lose some motivation, pineapple. They might lose an identity. They might say, oh, I am X professional that works at X place. And I work on this team with these people and accomplish these tasks. And in fact, for a lot of people, a lot of what they talk about just in conversation is work. How is work going? What are you doing at work? What's new at work? And so the next time they might go to, say, their church setting or a community setting or to a family event, and they say, hey, how's work? Well, I'm retired now. Oh, how's retirement? Maybe they don't have a whole bunch to say. Maybe they do. Maybe they picked up some new craft or hobby. But like, you can imagine, though, that this is a big transition. So when you look at earned rest, the period of time where that earned rest has kind of its first onset, when you first start going through that post-retirement period specifically, that can be a very vulnerable period, both psychologically, physically. We tend to become less active after retirement. So, just the fact that you got to walk out to your car, go maybe park in a garage and walk in to, whatever office building you work at, and then get up and move from office to office, whatever it is, for the most part, unless you have an intention about preserving physical activity in retirement, that can be one of the first things to go. And what I see is this really common sequence of, I'm so excited to retire. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait till I retire. The retirement comes, and if there isn't a really good plan to stay physically, socially, mentally active, then the symptoms start to pile up. And then someone notices that their knee hurts. And then that turns into, maybe I should go get my knee checked out to get a knee replacement. And then that turns into some complication from the knee replacement. And now we're not walking at all. And now we're not going upstairs. And now we're not doing sit to stand like we talked about a few podcasts ago. And I'm not trying to catastrophize. Just the idea is, when somebody's working towards an earned rest period or retirement or whatever you want to call it, I would encourage you, if that's you or an aging parent, if that's somebody you're trying to support, to the extent possible, to have a true retirement plan. I don't mean a financial retirement plan. I mean a health retirement plan. Like, how are you going to stay physically active, socially engaged, mentally engaged? What new hobbies are you going to pick up? What new volunteer efforts are you going to be participating in? What's going to give structure and meaning to your day? What new person are you going to connect with? In fact, I mean, you've seen a lot of people kind of unretire. And part of it is that, well, maybe it's financial, but part of it is your brain and your body have been functioning in that environment for so long, maybe 30 years by that point. It's not easy, even though retirement's, an earned rest period and you've worked towards it and, hooray, hooray to get to that point. But like, it's not necessarily the easiest way to go either. And so anyway, just to wrap up this meandering kind of semi-soapbox about this, is my thoughts on this are to be aware that you may have parents working right now and looking forward to an earned rest period. How that looks may be different to them than how you think it looks to them. They may be harboring expectations or imagining a world in the future that may or may not come to fruition, and you're probably part of that story. So the extent to which you can understand ahead of time the different parts of that story, where you fit in. And really, if you do want to assist somebody, if possible, if they're open to that conversation, really getting clear about the post-retirement plan and what that looks like to help preserve their overall health and function so that they really, really can enjoy an earned rest period to the extent possible, to mitigate all the things that they can to stay ahead of it and really to thrive in that period. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I will see you again next week. Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes three, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, you should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.